Chambers. It's Tuesday, September 1st, 6 p.m. We're starting on time tonight. And with that, item number 1 is to call the meeting to order. And with that, if we go around and introduce ourselves. Dean?
Dean Veneman, committee member, Alderman.
Does the audience want to introduce themselves? Okay.
Shane Blazer, Mayor.
Joe Eichstead, City Engineer.
Joe Terry, Director of Public Works.
Item number 2, and that's at 6 p.m. We're going to open and conduct an assessment hearing for the installation of municipal improvements on East Grand Avenue. That's from the bridge to 3rd Street, including 2nd Street from Birch Street to East Grand Avenue. Joe?
So initially here, I'll run through the engineer's report, giving us a summary of the assessment values, a brief description of how the assessments are calculated, and then it can be opened up for public comments. So how are special assessments calculated? It's based on lineal footage of frontage along the street. The basic parameters for calculating assessments include street surfacing being assessed at 20% of the actual cost, curb and gutter at 2/3, sidewalk 100%, sanitary and water services 100%, sewer and water main at no cost, no direct cost back to the property owner through assessments. For this project, there were 9 properties in the assessment district for a total cost of assessments of $58,023.86. There was additional $4,228.80 that was added to an individual parcel based on work performed for basement encroachment. And that was parcel number 34-08036. Each property owner was sent a proposed assessment report for their property, which itemizes the charges. And that was sent on July 23rd. And that concludes my engineer's report.
Is there any comments by anybody? Hearing none, I will close the assessment hearing, and we can go to item 3, and that's to consider a final resolution accepting the assessment report and corresponding assessments for municipal improvements on East Grand Avenue from the bridge to 3rd Street, including 2nd Street from Birch Street to East Grand Avenue. Committee. Jake, you're with us, aren't you?
Yep.
Okay.
Move to approve.
I'll second that. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor respond by aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Ayes have it, 3-0. Item 4 at 6:15. Well, can we do that?
I think you can, Tom.
Okay. We'll conduct an assessment hearing for the installation of municipal improvements on 7th Street, East Grand Avenue to Oak Street. And Joe again?
For 7th Street, there were a total of 6 properties. Total cost of assessments was $56,350.58. Again, each property owner was sent a proposed assessment report for their property, which itemizes the charges. And the assessment hearing was noticed to them on August 20th, which included their proposed assessment rates. And that's all I have for this report.
Is there any questions on any of it? any comments? We don't have anybody else on the phone, do we, Tyler? Okay. Hearing no questions or comments, we'll close the assessment hearing and we'll go to item 5. That's consider the final resolution accepting the assessment report and corresponding assessments for municipal improvements on 7th Street, East Grand Avenue to Oak Street. I'll move for adoption of the assessment report.
I'll second.
A motion and a second. Committee to approve. Any other further discussion? Hearing none, committee will vote. All in favor respond by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes
Aye.
have it. Thank you. 3-0. Item 6, consider reducing the speed limit on 48th Street between 1,013 feet south of Commerce Drive to 1,231 feet north of Commerce Drive from 45 miles per hour to 35 miles an hour for rail crossing safety and in coordination with the town of Grand Rapids. Joe?
So just a little bit of background with that. With the rail extension across 48th Street, initially we looked at leaving the speed limit at 45 miles an hour, and with the vision that's available for northbound traffic, the required traffic control at the crossing would be a stop sign, and that would be, there's a couple challenges with that. Compliance would be one concern for northbound traffic to actually stop at the stop sign, which is also a safety issue. But then also, the increased speed as they approach both the rail crossing and Commerce Drive with additional vehicle traffic. So the alternative that we looked at was, well, what if we looked at a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit through this area and talked with the property owners in town of Grand Rapids to secure a triangle of vision that would allow for yield control at 35 miles an hour, and that way traffic can keep moving. Given that the projected rail traffic across 48th Street is going to be about 5 cars a week, the yield sign would allow traffic to continue to cross more freely across the tracks, especially when the trains aren't present a lot of the time. So it did include an excerpt from the municipal code in the packet and identified kind of how that would look in there with the revision, and we're requesting approval to reduce the speed limit on 48th Street from 45 miles an hour to 35 miles an hour, just in the city's corporate limits there, north and south of Commerce Drive.
Any questions by anybody? Bill? Come forward. But you want to use the mic though, Bill, because we're on TV, so it picks it up better. Push the button there.
Oh, no. Okay, thank you. My name is Bill Clendenning. I'm on a town board in the town of Grand Rapids. And we had taken this up at our legislative meeting, and now it will go to the full board, which is the same as the legislative meeting. And it was passed by a vote of 3-2 to allow the speed limit to be reduced. One of the concerns I had is, why can't we get along as municipalities? The town didn't know anything about this until the day that I got called by 2 of the residents to come out and saying they were having a meeting with the city of Wisconsin Rapids about the speed limit on 48th Street. Why can't you come to the town board? why can't we have this conversation? And you were out there in, I believe, June 18th, and you did a study and all that stuff, and then all of a sudden now, you're going to reduce your speed limit to 35 miles an hour, I believe. You're going to reduce your speed limit within the limits of the city. But by September 9th, my understanding is, we could have did this all together. Yeah, yes, I'm pretty sure it's going to pass the full town board that we're going to go ahead and we're going to take the speed limit now all the way, probably it's going to be all the way from County Trunk W on 48th Street, where it's 35, then it goes to 45, and then we're going to reduce it all the way from County Trunk W, and all that road in the town of Grand Rapids is going to be 35 miles an hour. But it sure would have been nice if, the town would have been consulted on this instead of you people going to the neighbors of ours and saying, we got to clear it out. We're not going to put in a railroad lights. We're going to put, if we put a stop sign and keep it 45 miles an hour, that's not good. So that's all I have to say, but I just wish there could be a little more cooperation and the two boards could talk once in a while. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Anybody else? Hearing none, committee, what would your wishes be? I'll second that. Committee, is any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. All in favor respond by aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it, 3-0. Item 7, consider permanent limited easements with parcel 07-00173E and parcel 07-00187B in the town of Grand Rapids for vision triangles along 48th Street in preparation for the grade crossing in the Rapids East Commerce Center. Joe, do you want to touch on that?
So following up on the last item, this item is for permanent limited easements specific to the vision triangles only to make sure that that space is maintained free and clear for the necessary vision for northbound vehicle traffic. Included is in the packet is the exhibit that identifies the permanent clearing easement that's needed in the square footage. We did get some information back from Steve Shepro, the city assessor, to value what the easement cost, including the value of the vegetation that currently exists there, is worth. And those are identified in the packet. Let me see here if I can identify those for you. So for parcel 07-00173E, the initial price that the city assessor put together was $1,103. And for parcel 07-00187B, $1,183. And so this item is requesting approval from the committee to proceed with securing those easements with those two parcel owners.
And the owners are in agreement with the...
They are in agreement with the 35 mile an hour and the projected area that's needed. Mm-hmm. We did go out there and stake those triangles for them, but we wanted to bring this into the committee first before we reach back out to them to show them here's the document. We did pass it or bring it to the committee and make sure that they're good with it before it gets to council.
So if we would approve that, then you'd talk with the property owners and let us know by the council meeting.
Yeah, we would definitely proceed with talking with them. Nothing would get signed until after the council meeting, but just in case there's any other concerns, it can be brought up at the council meeting, and we could go from there, I guess.
And where it's not a lot of money, where does the money come from?
So the project is, or the funding for it is partially funded through the developer's agreement that the city has a certain cost share amount with the T grant that the city applied for through the state. And then the remainder of that balance is being funded by Metelco. So it's part of the project cost.
Yeah, okay. Anybody have any questions? Committee, you have anything? I'll make a motion that we approve the permanent limited easements for those two parcels, and that staff take that to the two property owners to go over it to make sure it's all in agreement with everybody.
Second.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to approve. Committee, all in favor, respond by aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Nays, the ayes have it, 3-0. Item 8 is to consider, discuss and consider signal and ITS standalone grant application for signal improvements along Riverview Expressway. Joe?
So I did just present it to the Property and Finance Committee in accordance with the city's grant management policy. So really, this item is probably more of a discussion, but back in late 2018, early 2019, the city worked with the Federal Railroad Administration, the DOT, and Canadian National for signal improvements to address signal issues along the expressway at Chase Street, West Grand, and High Street. And we made those basic upgrades, basic improvements at that time. And during that process, we evaluated the long-term needs of those intersections and identified a list of items that if funding became available somewhere, we would try to attempt to get it and get those improvements made. So that's where this grant comes into play. It's a 90-10 grant, 90% state funds, 10% local funds. And if approved through the grant process, it would be potentially implemented in 2023 or 2024. So any local match, budgeting for the local match would come just in advance of the implementation year. And so applications are due September 11th, and I guess the city has the ability to rescind the application at any point.
And our council meeting's on the 15th, so it'd just be that we can get this in on time and see what happens with it, and we can do whatever if we would be awarded it.
That's correct.
So this was just approved at Finance and Property, so are we acting on it here too?
I don't think it's actually necessary. The wording probably should have just said discussion, but it doesn't hurt either way.
Okay.
Okay, then we can move on, unless there's further questions on it. Hearing none, we'll go to item 9, and that's to discuss the special assessment study. I'll go to Joe Terry on this, and it's quite a lengthy report that we have, and he's going to give us a little overview, I think, on it, and then we'll talk a little bit maybe how we're going to proceed with it and that, so.
Sounds good. So in your packet is special assessment evaluation of alternatives report that was investigated and put together by city staff. It is a fairly lengthy document, and because we've had it passed out to alderpersons now for a week or so, I don't think it's probably the best use of time to read through the whole thing here this evening, so I'll summarize some things. Staff's goal with this at this time is to start discussions about how the city raises revenues for its street infrastructure and underground infrastructure replacement programs. And ideally, the first step, before any of these methods are either embraced or excluded, would be to develop a vision if the city wishes to put together a sustainable program, continue with the scope that we have now, or somewhere in between. So going through a little bit of background information, the current special assessment revenues per year are approximately $350,000 for street-related items. Street replacement and maintenance program is currently budgeted at about $1.5 million for street replacement annually, and about $800,000 for street maintenance annually. To be sustainable, that needs to be increased substantially. Right now, this covers about 30% of the need for a sustainable program. So with the current budget's amounts, a street built in 2020 may not be rebuilt until 2170, which, that's 100 years past the street's useful life. So I think this is an opportunity to look both at how we raise revenues and a vision for developing the model for street construction, reconstruction. There are growing disparities between aging streets and the ability to keep up with the replacement need. Additionally, it is anticipated that a $5.3 million budget would be the needed amount to replace and maintain streets at a sustainable level. So this is an important fact to keep in mind as this document is reviewed and as we have discussions in the future. A little background on the scope. This document reviews and summarizes the current special assessment ordinance along with other funding options available to the city, potentially in lieu of the current special assessment program or in combination with. The scope of the study compares and contrasts options, including the current special assessment procedures, and it's based on a variety of variables to weigh pros and cons of each option. In the document, there's also a matrix that helps identify pros and cons and kind of grades these. That's in a table. So that kind of helps provide an at-a-glance summary to the pros and cons of funding in comparison. And as I go through these, there are likely more pros and cons than what we came up with. And that's good discussion and debate into the future. A little background on our current special assessment program. The process begins through the adoption of a preliminary resolution by this committee and ultimately the Common Council that identifies the city's intent to levy special assessments, the properties that it affects, and an estimate of the cost for those improvements. There's a variety of design progress meetings and notifications with property owners through design and construction, and after construction is complete and all the costs are known, proposed assessment reports are created which identify assessment costs to property owners based on actual costs. We just experienced those meetings here this evening. After the assessment hearing closes, there's consideration on passing a final resolution which adopts the proposed assessment report. And once the council approves that, it causes the assessment charges and the administration of those efforts to levy those against the property owners. The cost to property owners under our current program is based on lineal feet of frontage along the improvement project and includes a variety of improvement types. There is a table on page 6, if you have the document in front of you, that breaks it down. There sometimes is the belief that the property owners are paying for all of the costs. Figure 1 really does identify the breakdown of those costs. So for a brand-new sanitary sewer main, it's a new development, new main extension, 100% of that sanitary sewer main cost is assessed to the property owner, whether it's a developer, whether it's individual lot owners. Replacement costs, however, are covered by the wastewater utility, so there are no costs for replacing sanitary sewer mains in future projects. Water mains are the same way. The pavement surface, 20% of the pavement surface is assessed to the property owner, and 60% is subsidized by the general taxes. If you add those two up, that's 80%, but that's because there's a property owner on either side of the street. So property owner on one side pays 20%, property owner on the other side pays 20%. The city general fund and taxpayers subsidize the rest. Curb and gutter, 66.6% of the costs are assessed to property owners, where a third is subsidized by the city. Sidewalk, 100% is currently assessed to property owners. And sanitary leads and water services, those are the laterals that run from the main that directly serve each individual home or business. Those costs are 100% assessed to the property owners. Statistically, we average about $5,300 per assessment for our major projects. Obviously, that can be a significant range depending on whether the property's on a corner, the size of the parcel, but on average, it's $5,300. And that breaks down generally, if you were to look at it as a monthly cost, like a utility bill or a cell phone bill or electric bill. That ranges somewhere between $30 and $42 a month if your street's replaced. It also depends, if it's over $5,000, it's spread out over 15 years, so the cost per month is less, extended over a longer time. If it was $4,900, for example, that's the most you could do on a 10-year assessment. There you're looking at that $41 a month cost to help pay for the road. There's a number of graphs and tables in here that really do help explain, I think, and draw a good picture of how the current assessment process works. Some of the pros and cons for special assessments. For the pros, some funding source is based on actual improvement and the amount of the improvement. It is separate from the general taxes. And with special assessments, those are collected from all parcels. So even tax-exempt parcels still pay assessments, so it's considered to be fair. Some of the disadvantages is that the assessments can be expensive, a one-time cost for the average homeowner. Most people don't look at it as a utility bill. They don't look at it as it's probably less expensive than any utility bill they may have. They see that one big number, and that's a shock. And as most elected officials can attest, there's a lot of contentious assessment hearings, people upset about the cost for those assessments. Assessment funds are generally from the same community tax base. Some of the cons, property owners don't generally anticipate this expense. They're not thinking about it until they get a notice of in the city's intent to assess. So it's not like they're planning for it for maybe 15 years and it's a couple bucks a month and it's no big deal. When they get the letter, it's a shock, and there's generally angst there. And that angst has and can impact project designs, as property owners are upset and less willing to discuss the issues that may fix or address issues. Their focus is on the cost and how that cost affects them directly. Administratively, engineering staff spend a considerable amount of time inspecting, documenting, discussing, measuring, and calculating special assessments, along with numerous meetings and phone calls with property owners, answering their questions about special assessments. The process is very formal. It's defined by state statute. We have to do it right, and there's many steps and a lot of detail. And the other con is not necessarily for special assessments, but for special assessments as we currently budget projects. We're on an unsustainable pace for maintaining and reconstructing city streets. And you shouldn't be alarmed by that. That's typical. Most communities, probably in the country, but certainly in Wisconsin, most cities are not on a sustainable pace to replace their infrastructure. And it continues to become a greater and greater issue, and eventually will become a very significant issue. So other funding alternatives may provide some additional opportunities over the current assessment program. And we do have in the report, the ordinances and policies are all in the appendix, so we can review that at your leisure. So looking at some of the alternatives, one of the alternatives is a vehicle registration fee. That's pretty self-explanatory. The report discusses how that works, but the Wisconsin DOT collects the fee when the annual state vehicle registration is paid. The DOT retains 17 cents per registration for administrative cost, and the rest of the fee is remitted back to the jurisdiction imposing the fee. Revenues from the wheel tax must be used for transportation-related purposes. So that's a state law. A number of municipalities statewide use this. Generally, they do not use it. It doesn't provide a significant contribution towards the overall street program. And I think, where was it? If the city charged, for example, $20 per vehicle, it would raise about $400,000 in revenues, which is about half of our maintenance budget. $30 per vehicle is just about $600,000 worth of revenue. So some of the pros and cons for the wheel tax or vehicle registration fees is you don't have the administrative efforts and the angst related to assessment hearings. There aren't any large assessment invoices. There's some flexibility in funding increases if there's a need to change the amount. It directly captures costs from users. If you don't own a vehicle, you're not paying a cost. There's very little administrative effort for municipalities. But on the other side, it only captures revenues from vehicles that are less than 8,000 pounds. And it's the vehicles that are over 8,000 pounds that generally cause most of the damage to the roads. There is a state retainage, so all of those funds don't stay with the community. And the communities that we talk to generally seem to use the program as a partial or a component of street funding and not a substitution for special assessments or some of the other methods. Another potential is the transportation utility. So a transportation utility raises revenues through the creation of a utility, similar to an electric utility, sewer water utility, or stormwater utility. Much like other public utilities, the transportation utility charges fees based on a customer's relative use of the utility. In other words, under a transportation utility fee, residents, public organizations, and businesses would pay a fee based on the amount of traffic they generate within the municipality's transportation and street system. The report goes into quite a bit of detail, but I wanted to mention that city staff met with Jeff Mazonik. He's a professional engineer from R.A. Smith. who has done a considerable amount of work developing these type of utilities. He suggested there's several methods for generating the fees and calculating that, but most of his models used trip generation methodology as they provide clear justification for the fees. This is a relatively new concept, and this particular professional engineer's objective is to make sure that it could withstand any trial in the courts, any challenge in the courts. So those fees are generally based on a certain amount of value for access to the roadway. So maybe you've got a piece of property that doesn't have a house on it, but it still has access to the roadway, so there's still some value there. It's maybe similar to a fixed, your fixed fee for your wastewater bill, for example. The number of trips being generated to and from access points causes degradation of the roadway. So generally, there's an equivalent for a residential equivalent for what people generally do. That's established, and then for some of the commercial and industrial facilities, there's a little more research that needs to take place to make sure that the fees would be fair based on their actual trip generation. And then a fixed charge component that also provides an overall system benefit. So basically 3 components. This is a fairly complicated but interesting concept, and so there are several pages in the report dedicated to discussion and learning how this works. But as far as the revenue needs, the transportation utility does present an equitable way for the city to secure the needed funds from infrastructure users via fee-based methodology. So just like other utilities charge fees based on use, so does a transportation utility. The revenue collected through a transportation utility can be incremented through the annual budget process to either offset current special assessment revenue. It could be used to offset so that the general fund is decreased, that maintenance activities, street reconstruction activities are removed from the budget and instead paid for by the utility. And of course, you can establish a model that potentially moves towards a sustainable street replacement program, so that the city streets are maintained then in perpetuity and sets a city up for basically a permanent future of infrastructure. There's a number of pros and cons also for this model. Some of the pros are equitability. It's based on use, and it doesn't have some of the limitations, like, for example, a wheel tax where vehicles over 8,000 pounds aren't charged. All businesses, public, private, all properties benefit from the transportation system, so the fees are equitable. Again, you don't have the administrative struggles with the assessment hearings. You don't have the large assessment invoices that shock value. Once the program is established, there's very little administrative effort other than, like any other utility, carefully reviewing revenues and costs to make sure that the utility is providing a good value to its customers and that the utility rates and expenditures are responsible. It creates a desire for projects versus an ambition to not do projects. Special assessments, that's what tends to happen. Someone would rather not see the project happen, even if it's needed, because of the cost impact. This method tends to result in more effort and administration required to prioritize projects, because now everybody wants a project. This type of method does tend to result in more effective communication with residents to talk about and solve real problems related to projects with the design, construction, and of the new street without that angst and constant focus on cost. It is flexible and allows for an increase of funding in a long-term sustainable program. There's consistent invoicing to properties. So again, there's expectations that are known and set, and there's no increase impact on taxes. Property taxes, depending on how you formulate this type of procedure, they could go down if your utility is covering all the costs, and there's no sense in the general fund doing that. There are some cons to it, and there's probably more than what we came up with. The initial utility setup does require a significant effort. There is a regular utility bill component, and that's that just like any bill, nobody likes to see that. And then there's also a fundamental debate maybe between utility costs and paying for these assets as a utility versus through property taxes and a portion of the revenues that the city receives in state shared revenues that come from your income taxes. So some of the concern or debate comes from those that are lower income and maybe are struggling. A small utility bill can have a significant impact on their lifestyle, whereas someone who has a higher level of income and more disposable income, a small utility bill might really not mean a whole lot, as compared to if you've got a very modest home with a modest income, your income and property taxes are lower, so you're paying a smaller amount. So that's a fundamental debate that needs to happen when something like this is being considered. Another possibility is just a general property tax increase. Looking at offsetting the typical special assessment revenues that the city generates annually, which is about $350,000. A property tax increase would be $33 per year to offset that. That doesn't start to address the fact that we're currently funding our street program at a third of what it would take to be sustainable. In order to do that, you'd be looking at about a $290 increase. So there's also some challenges with property taxes. It's generally considered, property taxes are considered bad. I think in a lot of cases it's because we don't do a great job of advertising what value and what services cost and what you're getting for your property tax dollar locally. But some pros and cons: there's no assessment hearings, there's no administrative effort relating to assessment hearings, you don't have those large assessment invoices. Again, like the transportation utility, there's a desire for projects to happen versus an ambition to stop projects and avoid assessment costs. And again, like the utility, there's generally then an more effective communication between residents who are now more interested maybe in solving some problems rather than dealing with specific costs. Some of the cons: the tax-exempt properties don't contribute to any improvements. The tax rate could be higher when compared to other communities, and as people are looking for places to live, that's one of the things that they look at right away. So it may make the community less attractive. In order to make any adjustments, the tax rate for transportation-related projects, the tax rate has to change. And in order to do that in this, under the current laws, it has to pass a referendum. So there's no, if that's a desire, there's no guarantee that that method would work and would require a significant amount of effort to educate the public before anyone would vote for a referendum to increase taxes. Another item that we took a look at was a payment in lieu of taxes for the wastewater utility. And we included this in the report, but I need to kind of put an asterisk by it because this is a way to generate revenue, but it's not necessarily a way to generate revenue for transportation. Municipally owned utilities many times pay the city a payment in lieu of taxes. And there's a number of reasons for that. Because the utilities do benefit from all the services that the city provides, the property, and the city currently does collect a payment in lieu of taxes from the electric utility and the water utility. Does not currently collect a payment in lieu of taxes from the wastewater utility. And that payment in lieu of taxes is generally based on the value of the infrastructure that exists. And so, so a payment in lieu of taxes set up for the wastewater utility, which I certainly think is appropriate, would likely result in a revenue stream of about $800,000 a year. So again, it would be about as much as what we're currently spending on our street maintenance program. But again, payment in lieu of taxes is, it shouldn't be considered a revenue stream for transportation. It should be reviewed on its own merits for benefits that the utility gets from the general taxpayers. So there's generally some debate that goes with that. But it is consistent with the other utilities, and our other city-owned utilities do complain about the fact that some are paying a pilot and some aren't. Pros and cons of a payment in lieu of taxes. Again, there's no assessment hearings, administrative effort, some of the other desires for projects versus not, if assessments can be replaced by this. It adds consistency between waterworks and lighting, both water utility and electric utility and wastewater, and there's no impact to the tax rate. Some of the cons to a pilot is that as infrastructure is replaced, that payment in lieu of taxes increases. So it can be a disincentive to replacing aging infrastructure as that calculation increases as the pilot increases the pilot as new assets are installed. It also means that sewer fees would increase. And very importantly, the fees are not specific to street replacement, as I mentioned before. It offsets the general tax levy. It's up to the council to decide how those funds are utilized. It's just like any other revenue stream. Another item that we looked at was a local sales tax. We didn't look at that one long, however. It's not a legal option for the city to consider. It's only available for cities and villages that have been designated as premier resort areas, such as Wisconsin Dells and in those areas. So our initial research concluded that the city of Wisconsin Rapids is not eligible for to enact a local sales tax. And another possibility is just remove special assessments. Without a alternative method to fund that, though, as a standalone option, it makes the gap of being sustainable even further. with $350,000 worth of revenue coming in annually from special assessments paid, as that weans off, that means there's $350,000 less of street replacement work. We're replacing streets at a third of the rate we should now. That would decrease that further. So in conclusion, this report identifies a number of different ways that the city can generate some revenue, whether it's to continue with special assessments, go through a different method, or some combination. Figure 8 on page 25 has a comparative matrix there that helps identify and scores some of these. For equitability, ease of implementation, administrative effort, what we anticipate would be public support, whether it replaces current revenue or not, if it has long-term sustainability, the invoicing method, if it's once a month, once a year, or not at all. There's administrative effort there, and then the cost to the property owner. So I think the goal of this was to identify a number of different methods, and I think one of the things that we need to do first is really discuss the city's vision and decide, do we want to simply replace the current special assessment revenue at the current amount with some other method, or do we want to evolve the program and make it into a sustainable program, whether that's over a short period of time or a long period of time? I think those types of discussions start the foundation of a broader discussion on reviewing this and making some recommendations. I think once we've discussed that, and if there's at least if it's narrowed down, we can send this back and redirect us as staff to come up with some various models for for what costs might look like, or what revenue streams might look like, what if it's a monthly fee base like a utility, what those fees look like, to put that in perspective so that the public can be informed and hopefully engaged in the process. At the end of the day, and I think, Tom, with your referral of this item some months ago, and certainly some of the struggles that we've all had with special assessments and the process that we've gone through and some of the debate that's occurred, I think at the end of the day, the goal is that this committee and the city council embraces the method that it chooses and works forward with it. When it's been challenging sometimes for staff, especially with special assessments, when they have to do their job and send out the notices, and the public that receives those notices aren't happy about the situation, they can provide a lot of stress. They're having a lot of stress, so there's some angst there. But also, when there's also the same pressure from city council that either doesn't understand or doesn't like the process, staff is painted to be the bad guy. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure that there's a clear understanding of the methods, and that whatever solution is decided, that the city embraces that solution as at least the solution that we're working with now and into the future, so that we can focus on developing great projects and serving the community instead of spending a lot of time debating methods and if it's fair or not. If there aren't any questions, or if you have any questions, Joe and I are certainly anxious to answer them, and I will be uploading this document onto our city's website so that the public in general has the opportunity to review this and become engaged in the process.
Yeah, either, Joe, on the wheel tax, is is there a state limit? Is that why they're all $20 or $30?
I don't believe there is a limit. I think the local municipality can set whatever rate they wish. I think generally communities do similar to what we're doing, and what's everybody else doing? And then they're looking at, well, are we using it to supplement what we're currently budgeting or currently collecting in their other programs or budgets? And it seems like a lot of them are using it to offset or augment their existing funds.
Well, I want to start by thanking city staff. They spent a considerable amount of time, as you can see, by putting this together and researching a lot of options for the council to consider. I guess just my 2 cents is, I look at the wheel tax as a Band-Aid, but it's not a fix. I think, most of us don't ever think about special assessments until you get that bill in the mail. Some are very large, some are, but since I've been in office for the last 5 months, it's probably been the single most item I have spoke to citizens about, is that concern when they get that bill and how much of a financial hardship it is, especially on the elderly. I spoke to a gentleman today, again, on 18th Avenue, another resident that I hadn't spoken to, and the financial hardship that has put them into. And I think with the creating a utility, I think that's a long-term solution, and it's a solution where we can eventually, hopefully someday, not only in the short term make up and replace special assessments, but as a long-term funding source for our operations, and with that flexibility. And you're not going to get that one-time big bill. I had one back in the early 2000s on one side of my property, and I'm waiting eventually that probably in my lifetime I'll see one on the other side. And I just think the utility is an option, a very good option, where we all just pay potentially a monthly fee. We're seeing that with stormwater utility. It's successful, and it's not so burdensome. And I think about our small businesses and trying to carry those special assessments, and I think it's a really good option, and I look forward to hopefully moving this along and council giving staff direction and starting that process to a funding source other than special assessments. We can move away from, like Joe brought up, it's always contentious between the elected officials and city staff is caught in the middle, and we don't have another option. I think this is a very good option, as this utility, and going forward and trying to eliminate so many issues that we have. And of course there could be another issue that'll come about, but I think we're finding out with the stormwater utility, that's smoothed itself out, and it's a pretty good working process. And I think this utility could be a very good option for us in the future, hopefully near future. Thank you.
Mr. Real?
Yes. Call the person?
I got a few questions and comments, if that's okay.
Yep. Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. So, first of all, I have to say I agree with the mayor. I do like the option of the wastewater treatment pilot. As far as the scores go, I have a question. Just on the general tax score, I noticed that it scores 0 as long-term sustainability. Could you provide some more detail to that as why that scored a 0? Not that I'm interested in that as the substitute here for special assessments. I'm just trying to wrap my head around the scores more in case I'm answered more questions.
So the reason that scores low for long-term sustainability is that the city doesn't necessarily have control of its tax levy. And if, right now there are limitations on both with expenditure restraint, total expenses, and the levy cap itself. And so if there's a need for additional funding, for example, for, transportation or any other part of the services that the city provides, maybe it's protective services or whatever, at this point in time, the city doesn't have the flexibility to make that change. Only the voters do. You can shuffle the, kind of play the moving the cup around a little bit and take some from one service and provide it to another. But you can't just unilaterally say, well, we need this, and so we're going to spend some more to do it. So that's why it's scored low, because the city just doesn't necessarily have control to do, what it feels is necessary, except for referendum.
Okay, thank you. Another question in relation to the wastewater utility pilot. Is that going to be billed to all water and light customers, or is that going to be specifically only to Wisconsin Rapids customers?
So that would be only for wastewater utility customers. There are very few wastewater utility customers that are outside of the city limits, both for wastewater and water. That's the case. There are more electrical utility customers that are outside the city limits. So it's exclusive to utility customers.
Thank you. And then my last question is there any talk at a county level of the wheel tax? I know other parts of the state, they tend to take the wheel tax on from the county perspective rather than the city, as a lot of times we all blend together and our cities are so close and we all use each other's roads. Does anybody know if there's any talk of that at the county level?
I'm not sure, but typically if there's a county wheel tax, that is not shared with the cities. It can be, the law does allow it to happen, as does if the city develops a wheel tax, it can do so in conjunction with the county and share revenues with the county. I'm not aware that the county is studying one, but I can't say with any certainty that that's the case.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to say I do like the transparency we're going to have of having this packet available on the website for some time before any decision is going to be made. And thank you to staff for putting this together. I know it makes it a lot easier for us on council to wrap our heads around it and understand it before we make a decision. I think having it available to the public for their understanding is going to be great as well, as they have questions for this. So that's all I have.
Okay, anybody else? Yes, sir, Joe.
Yeah, I'd just like to share a couple times where the special assessment didn't work. Number one is my own personal experience. I've got a piece of property that had a special assessment 3 times since I've owned it. That I don't think is fair. And then the other incident I'd like to point out, and I think some of you or all of you are aware of it, there's a widow in Wisconsin Rapids who came that close to losing her house because of the special assessment. I think a annual fee, something that we can put into our budget, would be a good idea, and not whap somebody with a $17,000 assessment. That $17,000 assessment is 1/3 of the value of her house.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, this is oops. Come forward. It should light up.
Okay. My name is Tim Zacher, and I also just wanted to commend everybody who has put this together. Year of 2020 has been quite interesting, and I think it's forced us all to think about how we can change what we're doing. So I think that I just would hope that the city council takes this and goes with it and makes some changes, because I don't think it's sustainable as it is, and there needs to be change. So hopefully one of these solutions can be the answer. So again, I appreciate the effort and look forward to learning more.
Thank you. And for myself, it's been something that's come up over many years, and finally got something put in that and on the paper here. And I also like to thank staff, because a lot of time and effort had to be put into this, I would think, to come up with what we are handed out to review before the meeting tonight. There's a lot of things to consider, different routes to go. Some look better than others, but I think we have to keep in mind as we progress the citizens of their ability to pay. You know, from the ones on the lower income level to the ones on the higher income level, to somehow to keep that thought in mind as we progress through this. And so our next item is actually to talk about long-term goals and that. So I don't know how much we're going to get into that, but I think really tonight we wanted to have an overview, which we did. We heard pros and cons. We talked about, or Joe talked about a vision of what we could have, or sustainable program, or do we want to leave it as it is? Basically, you know, 3 different routes to go, but then if we're going to change it, what would the different, what program would we like to go to? And there are some that jump out that looked at that might be the best route to go. But from myself, not now to let this, all this effort that we finally have here, let it just sit on the vine and die off with the fall. That how can we keep this alive and keep this moving, and encourage comments from the public, but the council as a whole, because that's who's going to finally make the decision on if there's a change or how it's going to be. I've listened to I don't know how many assessment hearings in that, when people and it was a why not to do a project, more so than to do a project. Why do we need a sidewalk versus it makes sense to have a sidewalk? Because there's, you know, so there is, I think, could be a lot of potential that we could look at doing more, obviously, but the cost is how it's spread out amongst the people. So that person doesn't get hit with a $17,000 bill or something, which is quite an eye-opener. And then even if you look at the 5,300 or whatever the average is, I mean, that's still a pretty big bill. If everybody got 5,300, that's still a pretty big bill. So I think, where do we go from here? Because I don't want to let this die. It's been a long time coming. We have this in the works. It's to keep moving forward with it. Personally, for myself, I think if we could have this in this next item again, but about the long-term goal, because what we're doing now, we just keep falling further and further behind. So to me, it'd be to somehow look at the long-term sustainability of the program versus where we're at now. So if there's any way we can get away from the special assessments entirely, I'd be all in favor of it. Staff goes through a lot of extra grief, I know that, over all these years, and I also know that the committee and the council has gone through a lot of grief over all the years of that, because they've had to make those tough decisions, and to do a project, you want to do it in the right way, and there's been over many times probably parts of a project got left out, and it shouldn't have been done that way. We didn't, and so I'm just looking at that we can come up with get the best for the buck, best bang for the buck, and be fair to every citizen in the community, and that we can move forward with a new program, whatever that may be. So it's just, I don't know, Dean, if you have anything to add in, or Jake, if you did too, Dean, right now.
Yeah, first of all, again, I'd like to echo what everybody else said, thanking the staff for putting this together, especially the transparency. And as this does get put out onto the website, I think the citizens can see, especially some of the examples of other cities and how they've utilized that, cities our size and that type of thing. And I agree with the mayor that the transportation utility has got some serious merit in terms of how to address this issue. And I, for one, intend to reach out to my constituents and get their opinions, maybe town halls type things, get in touch with people, reach out to people and find out, to make sure that people are more aware of what these options are. Because, again, it's like we've all talked about, the immediate action is received after they receive a bill in the mail. And so thank you for at least giving them options. And so I'm going to reach out to my constituents and talk about these options, because a lot of them, like Tom and other people have said, and the mayor said, I'm the new guy on the bus on this group, but that's by far the most phone calls I've got have been on special assessments, even more than the pool. So yeah, I want to be able to reach out and answer these people, and thank you for this report to be able to answer these people and address it. So I appreciate that. Thanks.
And, Mayor.
I was just going to ask, I don't know if it's too quick, but even next month, if we could get this back on your Public Works agenda and narrow it down to maybe one or maybe two options, and then really seriously look at those options and then start developing a plan maybe.
Yeah, and my next question probably for me was going to be, what would be the best way to move forward on this? And could we expect or give staff direction to come back with more information at a meeting that you'd have something available for next month, or what could be done?
Yeah, or even, citizens or the council staff, we can listen to any feedback and comments that we have, and then maybe come back and then have another discussion, and then maybe kind of decide maybe a couple options and how we can go forward from that point. But maybe take this opportunity, like Dean said, about, reaching out to people and allowing constituents to contact us to give us their feedback, and maybe everybody will give us the same feedback and we'll kind of have a stronger direction. But I think most of us will agree that the special assessment option is, in my opinion, time to go away.
Joe?
So what we could do is, get this report on the city's website, work with our IT and media staff to also get it out in our Facebook link and some of our other social networking tools, and really try to encourage community feedback so that hopefully you all will get some calls, we'll get some calls, mayor's office will get some calls to comment on this, and hopefully we can maybe sit down, collect that information prior to the next Public Works meeting, and create just a summary of comments, recommendations, things like that, so that, whether it's your own, your own suggestions as far as what to focus on, as well as, from the public. I know as staff, we're anxious to work on this. We have some of our own opinions. Hopefully they align with the public, but they may not, right? So I think if we can be prepared to try to get this out to the community as quickly as possible, get as much feedback as we can, and it may take a few months to get the feedback that the city council desires. But I do agree. I think including it on an agenda on a monthly basis until we have this, until we're ready to embrace a plan, I think is a wise move. Like we've all said, this has been a lot of work in progress, a lot of angst and And you know, like you said, Mr. Chairperson, we certainly don't want to let it die in the vine at this stage. We want this to move forward and hopefully come up with a solution that the community's proud of. And again, having, you know, we spent a lot of time on our wastewater rate structure to make sure that the infrastructure, that what people don't see underground, is a sustainable system, you know, into the permanent future. And I'm very proud of that. And I couldn't be prouder if we can do the same thing for our street system. So 100 years from now, people can look back and say, you know, see, Wisconsin Rapids created a model here where maybe some other cities waited and struggled more as their infrastructure deteriorated. You know, we'll have the wherewithal to be sustainable sooner and develop business and have industry want to be here because of our robust infrastructure.
Thank you, Joe. So we'll put it on the agenda on a monthly basis. We'll try to move forward. It's not something that we're going to, in 1 or 2 months, resolve. You know, hopefully maybe we can start narrowing the thing down of what to look at to do and to get, you know, become more finite on what we're looking at. I also think that the long term looking at of it, the sustainability to, you know, that we can do more than what we are now. The road, our infrastructure is going to fall apart before we replace it. So we'll see what we come up with. And I think, and I appreciate the pros and cons, Joe, that you did in your overview here, because there are pros and cons, I think, for each one for people to look at. And when this going out to the public, that the public may come up with some more pros and cons too, or our fellow council members may. So
right.
So we get that all put together, and then we see where we can go. Because there is potential, I think, with changing this from this assessment that we have now. So with that, if anybody doesn't have anything else on item 9, that's to discuss the assessment study, we can move to 10, and 10 is actually to discuss and consider long-term goals of the street program based on the review of the special assessment study. So I don't know, does anybody have anything to add right now this evening, or?
No, I think, you know, my goal in requesting this item to be on the agenda was to have the discussion that we just had. And,
okay.
And if it's appropriate, I'd include in the minutes that we'd add this item to the referral list and include it on the monthly agenda for discussion until, you know, until the committee's either satisfied we have a resolution or the committee decides it no longer belongs on the referral list.
Yep, that'd be fine. Fine with me. And with that, we can move to item 11, that's to review the DPW report.
So I did not include a DPW report in your packet. I was on vacation and didn't get it actually done until today. And so I'm not going to dwell on it this evening. I will get it emailed out. It is currently on the city's website on the Public Works homepage. But we did have another busy month, and I hope you get a chance when I send this out, that you get a chance to review it. Again, the staff, all of our staff deserves a pat on the back for the amount of work. Just wanted to mention, I mean, we got a really nice phone call today from a resident who saw our staff working on some of the patchwork on the street and called to say how professional they were and how cooperative they seemed to be and efficient working as a team. You know, we don't get those every day, and our staff works hard out there and oftentimes doesn't get that type of congratulations. So I wanted to mention that publicly.
Yeah. Thank you with that too. And as we're notice a little change in the weather temperature here, makes me think, and it's only the 1st of September though, but how are we looking at with our projects?
Yeah, our construction project,
finishing up and wrapping up, we still have a couple months to go, but I mean,
we're looking better this year than we have in a number of years, especially considering we had a significant project this spring that was a carryover from last year due to all the storm damage. Our Washington Street project is progressing very well. We're actually a little ahead of where I had expected that we would be. And we're looking good to have everything wrapped up by the end of the season, and to potentially, actually there's a couple of other developer type projects that we may be able to hammer out this fall yet that have just come up. So I feel really good about it, Tom.
That's good, thank you. Mayor?
Maybe, Joe, you can help me out. Derek's award.
Sure. So city just received another prestigious award thanks to some hard work by our staff. Derek Budsberg is one of our chief operator at the wastewater plant, and just received state recognition in part from the DNR for the quality and improvements to the city's lab. At the wastewater plant, the city performs its own laboratory work, and that work has to be done in strict accordance with standards and procedures for wastewater testing. Derek has worked very hard. He's a relatively new employee here, and has worked very hard to make sure that not only is our lab work completely compliant, but that we've created documentation on how to make sure that we continue to do it with complete compliance, updated the lab with very little expense, but to bring the lab up to date, and the fact that we're recognized as one of the top wastewater labs in the state is another significant feather in the city's hat. A number of our projects, from our wastewater river crossing project that just won a national award, our wastewater superintendent, and now our wastewater chief operator, both being recognized as the top state awards. It just goes to show the dedication that our staff has, and that's thanks to the support of the city council and just the community spirit that we have in Public Works.
Thank you, and our wastewater meets tomorrow.
It does.
At 1:30, so, and it's, actually, it's a pleasure to be able to meet with those guys out there, so. I keep learning about it, even though I've been on the committee a long time, I keep learning, so. If there's nothing else, we can go to item 12, and that's to review the referral list. I think, Joe, you mentioned about adding on about we were just with the, putting on our monthly agenda with the, how we pay for assessments, or not pay for assessments, so, which is a request already, but, so I don't think there's anything to take off that I'm looking at right now.
No, Alderperson Veneman, looking at your referral, is it substantially different as far as the 18th Avenue project design and assessments than? Okay. Take 9 off and replace it with continued review and discussion. Okay. Thank you.
All right. If there's nothing else, then we're at item 13, and that's adjournment. I'll move we adjourn.
Second.
A motion and a second to adjourn committee. All in favor, respond by aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it, 3-0. The meeting's adjourned at 7:25 p.m. Thank you, everybody.